Now, I'm sure you're familiar with the concepts of traditional retirement and early retirement, but did you know there are actually other retirement types out there? And you could achieve them much sooner than full retirement. On the following episodes, I'll be outlining 3 alternative retirement types and how you can achieve them. So stay tuned. You don't have to wait until you reach financial independence to start enjoying your life. You can do that much earlier and start living a life that you love and that's true to you. Welcome to Freedom Before FI. Using FIRE and life design techniques, we help you create freedom on your way to FI instead of waiting until you're retired to do the things that light you up. I'm your host Greg, a FIRE movement and life design enthusiast. If you're itching to get freedom now, then let's do this. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Freedom Before FI. Whatever you're up to today, I hope you're doing really well. Okay, so you might be on your journey towards financial independence, working full-time, saving, investing, but you might feel the need to have a break, maybe to slow down and do something completely different. And I'm not talking about taking your typical annual leave. Maybe you don't like your current situation, maybe you dislike your job, your industry, or don't like the type of work you're doing. Or perhaps there's something pulling you away, like the need to spend more time with family, maybe go traveling, or do volunteering. Well, I've got good news for you because there are alternative retirement options that can give you more time to do more living. Now, the good thing about these options is that they're easier to achieve in terms of time to get there and the amount of savings you need. The other good thing is you can use them and still be on track to FI in the future. So I've got 3 alternative retirement types I want to tell you about in this little mini-series, starting with the first one on this episode. What I'll do is for each option, I'll explain what it is, how you can get it, and then their pros and cons. Alright, so let's dive into the first one. Okay, so for today's episode, the first alternative retirement option is mini retirements. So this one has lots of names like sabbatical, career breaks, and adult gap years. But they all mean the same thing, which is an extended period of time away from full-time work. There's really no set duration, but I would recommend a minimum of 2 to 3 months to get something out of it. I think anything less than 2 months might be a bit short, and I'm sure we've all taken that 1 or 2 weeks annual leave, and it always doesn't feel enough. I think it usually takes like 1 or 2 months just to properly rest from working life, but of course it really depends on personal preference. Some may take 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, or even more. I hear stories of people that planned a 1-year break, but ended up loving it so much they decided to extend another year. Okay, so there's lots of reasons why people take mini retirements. Sometimes it's to recover from burnout, to solo travel, to volunteer, or to work on personal projects, or it could be a mix of things. The main thing is you're not in full-time work. Instead, you're doing things that you love. It's like testing what retirement could actually look like in the future. If you're listening right now and never taken a mini retirement or sabbatical and it's something you'd love to do, have a quick think right now. Off the top of your head, what would you do with all of that time? Spend a few minutes right now just thinking what exactly would you do? Now, your mind may have brought up sunny beaches, hiking in mountains, working on hobbies. You see, the best thing to do on a sabbatical are the things that you personally love doing, not what someone else says or what a news article says, although you could get some good ideas from them. But again, the best things to do on a sabbatical is what you truly want to do. So me personally, I've taken 3 of these. The first one was after I graduated university, where I traveled for 3 months in California. But I would class that more as a gap year type situation. It was basically a little bit of travel after uni before going to my first full-time job. Now the second was a 1-year sabbatical in my early 30s, and I literally traveled around the world. Well, not to every country, but I physically flew around the circumference of the earth, from UK, the Indian Ocean, Southeast Asia, West Coast and East Coast of North America, then back to UK. It was hands down one of the best and life-changing experiences of my life. My personal development skyrocketed during this time as well. And I also met my now wife during that time. She might listen to this episode, so of course I have to say it was the best decision ever to go on sabbatical. But anyway, it truly was the best decision I've ever taken. Okay, and the third one is the one I'm currently on right now with my wife. It's another 1 year sabbatical, and I'm now in my late 30s. We've taken this time off to spend quality time with loved ones, especially my parents who are getting on a bit. It's also an extended honeymoon as we wanted to travel and spend more time together. Alright, so in order to plan for a sabbatical, there are 4 general factors you need to consider. And those are purpose, duration, budget, and key dates, which is basically your why, how long, how much, and when. So let's start with the first one, which is your why. This is the most important as it will influence all the other factors. Your why will tell you what you'll do on your sabbatical. For example, if it's to rest, to travel, start a business, or even go back to university. The next one is how long. This will depend on your why and in part your budget. The why is more important because if your why is strong enough, you'll definitely find a budget, believe me. Anyway, if you need to rest and recover, I would say something along the lines of 3 to 6 months would be okay. If you want to do slow travel or start a new business, maybe you might need 6 to 12 months or even longer. Now, these are just some rough timescales. Of course, it all depends on personal preference and your resources. Now, the next factor to consider is how much, so basically your budget. This is where you need to estimate how much you think it will cost you, based on things like the duration, your monthly expenses, and any one-off costs. You might even find that you've got some FU money stashed that you can use. Otherwise, you need to save up for it. If you've already been tracking your expenses, and top marks to you if you have, you can use that as a guide to forecast your expenses in your time off. But just remember though, your mini retirement expenses will likely be different, as it might include more expensive items like flights, hotels, training courses, insurance, cost of any events and what have you. It really depends on what you do. So calculate the total amount you think you'll need for the whole duration, including all the usuals like food, accommodation, transport, entertainment, clothes and things like that. Just remember to include all one-off costs and include a contingency for any emergencies. Try to get as granular as you can. Okay, so you might glance at your estimated costs and fall off your chair, because that's basically what happened to me before. But just think of it as an investment that will pay you massive dividends. And remember, investing in yourself pays the best interest. Okay, so the fourth factor to consider is when. So this depends on your personal circumstances, your work situation, and of course your budget, as you may need time to save up for it. My tip here is to at least have a rough target date in mind before speaking to your employer. So you kind of need to align all of those factors I mentioned earlier. Okay, so once you have an idea of all of those factors like your why, how long, how much, and when, that means you already have a rough master plan in mind. So the next step, if you're working full-time, is to ask permission. Now, your company may already have a sabbatical policy allowing staff time off. Some may even pay for them, but those companies are probably few and far between. If there's no sabbatical policy, then you might need to negotiate an agreement or even consider leaving, depending of course on how important the sabbatical is to you. Although that's quite a big decision, and actually that might be a whole separate episode itself. Anyway, assuming your company will allow it, agree a date in mind, then just work towards that. Alright, so let's go over to the pros and cons of a mini retirement, starting with the pros. So the first pro is, you can actually get a mini retirement much sooner with less saved up compared to achieving FIRE. The second pro is that it gives you a chance to rest if there's an urgent concern, like maybe burnout or any mental or physical health issues, and you don't need to wait till you've reached full FIRE to get some time off. The other pro is that it lets you enjoy life now and not work at all for like 6 or 12 months, or whatever the duration it is you had in mind. You can literally do whatever you want to do. It's kind of mind-blowing when I think about it, actually. Okay, so the next pro is that it doesn't have to be a one-off. You can have multiple mini retirements throughout your career. There was one guest I heard on a podcast who took a year off every 5 years. He used it as an opportunity to take a break from his work and reflect on life, spend more time with his family, and reflect on his next steps going forward. It's kind of like the Sabbath year back in the day, where they gave their crops a break every 7 years to rest and rejuvenate. Actually, I believe that's where the term sabbatical traces back to. So just like the crops, we also need to rest and rejuvenate ourselves. Alright, so let's go over to the cons then. So the first one is, depending on the duration, you would have need to have saved up a chunk of savings. So in round numbers, let's say you estimated that you need £2,000 a month during your sabbatical. So for a 6 months trip, that's £12,000 that you need saved up. If you wanted a 12 months trip, then you need to save up £24,000. Well, anyway, that's just a rough calculation, but that just gives you an idea. The second con is that you won't have any monthly income coming in during your time off. But I think that's more of a mental hurdle because you would have saved up beforehand anyway. But it's just something to think about. Unless you do any sort of part-time work or freelancing work or some odd jobs here and there, which you can actually do. It's totally up to you what you want to do in your sabbatical. Another con is that it can impact your saving and investment goals for a bit, but I suppose you have to think of it as a trade-off. Anyway, if your investments are in the market, compound interest will still be doing its thing in the background and your money will be going up, but maybe not at the rate that it was when you were investing every month. Okay, so the last con is one that comes up a lot when talking about sabbaticals, and that's having a gap in your resume. Although that really depends on what you do and what you've learned during your time off. For example, someone could have done some volunteering at a charity or done some further education. Or they learned new skills like leadership or project management through some online courses during their time off. And future employers may even find you even more interesting because you took some time off to travel or start a passion project or something. Anyway, I've mentioned some cons here just so you are aware of them, but just note that each of these cons can be tackled or managed in some way. From my experience, the pros definitely outweigh the cons by miles. You can tell I'm really biased towards mini retirements. Anyway, if you do have any questions on sabbaticals, mini retirements, adult gap years, please feel free to send me an email. Alright, so let's go over to the key takeaways from today's show. Alright, so in the beginning, we discussed generally what mini retirements are. And they are an extended time off from full-time work to focus on something meaningful to you. Maybe that's to rest, travel, to study, volunteer, do a career change, or work on a passion project, for example. And then we talked about the 4 factors to consider when planning a sabbatical. And those were purpose, duration, budget, and key dates. Otherwise known as your why, how long, how much, and when. And in the last part, we discussed some pros and cons to consider. And then what we found is that each of these cons that we brought up can be tackled or managed in some way, shape, or form. Alright, so that covers part 1 of the mini-series. On the next episode, we'll be discussing another retirement option. So I'll see you on the next one. Have a good one. If you think this episode would help a friend, please don't hesitate to share it with them. The show notes can be found at freedombeforefire.substack.com. If you have a question or want to connect, feel free to send me an email at freedombeforefire@proton.me. That's freedombeforefire@proton.me. If you found this show useful and want to be notified of future episodes, you can follow us on Spotify or Apple via the show's main page or on whatever app you're using right now. And lastly, if you've just learned one good thing that will help you in your journey and you want to help us out here, please do leave a 5-star rating on your podcast player app. If you're using Apple Podcasts, you can even leave a nice review by scrolling to the bottom of the podcast page. That would help us out loads. And always remember, practice gratitude, live life by your design, and do things that make you smile. You got this.